Vacuoles. So we're finishing up the organelles, and today we're going to talk about vacuoles. Oops. And so a vacuole is a fluid-filled sac for storage. Here's a large central vacuole. So this is a plant cell, and in a plant cell, there's usually an enormous vacuole. They're small or absent in animal cells. So if it's an animal cell, you can have a little vacuole, but you can call it a vesicle there too, because it's so little. With plants, there's this enormous vacuole, and we call it a central vacuole because it's so big. Here's the important thing that I want you to know. Oops. So right along here is a membrane. And so most of these organelles, the chloroplasts, the mitochondria, the vesicles, the Golgi body, including this thing, the central vacuole, these things all have membranes, right? So this is what we call a membrane-bound organelle, or an organelle that has a membrane around it. And I'm kind of drawing it messy, but you're going to pretend that I drew this all the way around. So that's a membrane. So the question I have for you is, can this thing be found in a bacterial cell? And of course the answer is no, it can't, because bacterial cells don't have any membranes inside. They only have an outer membrane. So here's a bacterial cell. It's got that outer, it just disappeared. There it is. There's my bacterial cell. It's got some DNA in here. It's got a membrane outside. It's got ribosomes. It might even have a flagellum or cilia or whatever, but it does not have any membranes in here. And so here's the important part. You can put a star next to it. There are no vacuoles in bacterial cells. And of course, I want you to remember that bacterial cells are also called prokaryotes. Pro meaning before, karyote meaning nucleus. So remember, the bacterial cells are those simple cells that have nothing in them but some goop and some DNA and some ribosomes. That's some enzymes, and that's kind of the story for them. In plant cells, there is a large, we call it a central vacuole. It's this enormous thing sort of in the middle of the plant, and it takes up so much space that we call it a central vacuole. Here's the function of the central vacuole, one of the many functions of the central vacuole in a plant cell. So the central vacuole in plants is important for keeping turgor pressure. So turgor pressure means this. See how water comes into the plant and it's nice and full? That's called a crispy plant. So if you buy some lettuce, crispy, and it's still crispy, that's a turgid cell. If you buy some lettuce that's all wilted, or if you go outside and look at your vegetable garden or your flowers in the summertime and it's a really hot day and they haven't had enough water, they'll be wilted, and what's happened is the water's been lost from this central vacuole. So we'll go over that in a unit, maybe 2 units from now when we do the cell membrane. We'll go over why it happens. For now, I just want you to get the word turgor, or turgid cell. Okay, contractile vacuole. First of all, the important thing, more important even than a contractile vacuole, take a look at this thing. First of all, I want to know the domain, and I want to know the kingdom. So for domain, look, it's got this thingy that's got a membrane around it, and that thing, it looks like it's enclosing something in a membrane. There's another membrane, and another membrane, and another membrane. So this has to be a eukaryote or a prokaryote. It's got all those internal membranes, so it's got to be a eukaryote, or a eukaryotic cell. Same thing. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 types, at least for what we've talked about. We might, scientists are always kind of fiddling with the number of kingdoms that we have. But for now, I want to still keep with plants, animals, fungi, and protists. So what I want to know is, what is this thing? Well, it's single-celled, so that cuts out plants and animals. Most fungi are also multi-celled, and fungi have a cell wall, and this thing doesn't, so I'll cross out that. So this is a protist. It's a protist that's more like an animal than like a plant because there's no cell wall, but we call it a protist because it's unicellular. And remember, protists are this really crazy group of, they're really not, they really shouldn't be a group because they're so incredibly diverse. And we'll do that in our very next unit, classification and diversity. So anyway, this is a eukaryote and it's a protist. So the eukaryote is the domain, which we'll talk about in our next unit, and the protist is the kingdom, which we'll also talk about in our next unit. Okay, so the contractile vacuole is found in unicellular protists, like the paramecium. So here's a paramecium. And you don't have to memorize that, but you should know the protist part. It's a single-celled eukaryotic organism. It pumps excess water out so the cell doesn't burst, and that way it maintains homeostasis. So the crazy thing here is that water keeps coming in, and this is actually a topic for our next unit too. I just want to define contractile vacuole now, but the unit after next, we're going to do cell membranes and how things move in and out of a cell membrane. And so you'll understand why water comes in at that point. So you're going to assume that this paramecium lives in fresh water and that water's coming in, and I'll explain why it comes in later. But the contractile vacuole pushes water out. And if it didn't push all that water out, this whole thing would get so much water into it, it would burst. Bummer. So here's a video of it that I'll show you in class because it's probably not working here. So it keeps the cell from lysing, or another word for lysing is bursting. So here's another vocabulary word for you to memorize. You put a star next to that. You should know the word lyse means to burst. Okay, plastids. I think I'm going to start a new video for this.